Hello there, and welcome to another episode of Three Guys in the Word. It's great to be back once again to continue our study in the Book of Esther. It's great to see my fellow brothers in Christ from the Taylorsville Road Church for Christ. It's good to see you, Chris, and you, Eric. Again, my name is Andrew Ulmer, and we're just grateful to have this opportunity to look into God's Word. We're in the latter portion of the Book of Esther. So we encourage you, if you are just tuning in for the first time, please take an opportunity to look at the previous episodes where we've walked through the first six chapters so far. And we hope that what we have done well is done a due diligence and accurately handled the Word of God. And this has been a great discussion so far for me personally. Just it's great to be able to get together and really dive deep and pick away and meditate on what this particular book says about God and who He is. It's just amazing that He has presented a portion of His mind, His thoughts to us, and Esther is part of that story of about who He is. It's just beyond comprehension. Just being able to have access to, hey, this is what I'm trying to tell you about me, and looking forward to our discussion today. And we do encourage you to have your Bibles out and make sure that you follow along. Don't just listen to what we have to say and read along with us. Encourage that. But we'll be diving here in just a moment. But just first, want to see how people were doing. Eric, how's your day going?
Very well. Spent time with the kids today and worked on a couple of little household things. So going really well. Chris, how you doing?
Going good. We started a little bit late because of me, because I was running all around town. We had workouts today, so getting closer and closer to the season. So that's what I'm gonna be doing a lot in my free time when I'm not working. So excited about that, and excited about starting our study or continuing our study today out of Esther with you guys. You doing all right, Andrew?
Yeah, it's been a good day so far. Had a study earlier with a fellow brother and met a couple other members, chatted for a little bit. So it's been a fulfilling day so far, and looking forward to our discussion. And as what we always like to do is before really diving into the section that we're going to be discussing, we're going to briefly talk about, well, what we covered last time, just some of our thoughts. And Chris, I believe you have our principal verses that are key to our discussion. If you want to go ahead and read those, and then also just take a couple moments to share your thoughts from last video.
So we covered our principal verses a few episodes ago out of Esther chapter 4, verses 13 through 14. It says, and Mordecai told them to answer Esther, do not think in your heart that you will escape in the king's palace any more than all the other Jews. For if you remain completely silent at this time, relief and deliverance will arise for the Jews from another place, but you and your father's house will perish. Yet who knows whether you have come to the kingdom for such a time as this? And we've kind of seen this verse play out the last few episodes of what Mordecai was talking about. And you can see the providence of God throughout this book of Esther being put in this position for a reason. So we covered chapter 6 last week. Irony is a word that kind of comes to my mind when reading this. We've talked a lot about Haman. He's been one of the central figures of this text so far. Haman wants Ahasuerus to put him in the highest place possible. He's really doing everything he possibly can to receive praise from Ahasuerus, and he's trying to really inflict his will upon the Jewish people of wiping them off the face of the earth. We talked about how this was a year plan that had been put in place, and really you think of like a countdown clock of that time coming. And the interesting thing is really that bitterness and animosity is really focused on one individual that we see, and that being Mordecai. And Mordecai is interesting because he's actually related to Esther, and he raised Esther. So none of these people were here by accident. So we talked last week, or we talked in the end of chapter 5. Mordecai is outside the king's gates. Haman's inside, getting the praise, getting to go to banquets. Really, he feels great about himself, but he tells his wife and his friends that despite all the good things happening, Mordecai still being there is just such a bother. He can't enjoy anything else. So they put this plan in place to kill Mordecai and to humiliate Mordecai in the way that he dies, by hanging him. And before that can take place, like Eric had pointed out last week, Ahasuerus is having a hard time sleeping, and all of a sudden he asks for this book. He opens the book, and Mordecai's good deeds that we had read earlier of him warning Ahasuerus of an attempt on his life comes back to light, and what's been done for Mordecai? And they tell him, well, you didn't do anything for him. So it just so happens with everything going on, when Haman thinks he's going to be elevated even higher, Ahasuerus is reminded, I think providentially, about Mordecai. And probably one of the most humorous texts of the whole Bible to me is down in verse 11, where it says, Haman took the robe and the horse, arrayed Mordecai, and led him on horseback through the city square, and proclaimed before him, thus it shall be done to the man whom the king delights to honor. And for Haman, that was probably a very hard pill to swallow. And you can almost imagine him, like, not the way that we communicate, but like when you have to say something you really don't want to say, you can almost imagine him, kind of mumbling it. Probably wasn't the most exciting thing he had ever said. And then he goes back home, and his family's like, you're not going to win this with Mordecai. Despite just a couple chapters ago, they're telling him, we're going to go through this plan and we're going to help you get rid of Mordecai. So it's interesting how things can shift so quickly. And really, for Haman wasn't fighting against Mordecai, and he really wasn't even fighting against the Jewish people. Ultimately, God goes to bat for Mordecai and providentially puts Mordecai in the positions that he was in. And Haman might not have realized he was fighting with God, but Haman was not going to win. And you see that really through the heaviness of this. So, really, from last week, I really want to know what Mordecai was thinking. I'd said that last week. What in the world is going through his mind as this is taking place? He knows Haman hates him and despises him, and he's having to do this. You would like to see the psychology of the two. That's something that, I would love to know more about. Obviously, God doesn't see fit that we know that, but humanly speaking, you have to wonder what's going through these two individuals' minds, specifically through the events of chapter 6. We're really looking forward to continuing to reading the story. What did you get from our discussion last week, Eric?
Well, humor, I think, is the key idea, like you brought out, Chris. It's the first thing that's humorous to me in the chapter is that the king, he can't sleep, so he asks for like books of history to be brought to him, which is something most people can probably understand, that like dry, tedious history. Like, I can't go to sleep. Bring me something that will put me to sleep. Bring me the surefire cure for my problems going to sleep. And so, like, pretty much any record would have been brought before him and he would have went to sleep. But the one record that's not going to put him to sleep is brought to his attention. That's the record that's really going to make him feel anxious to make things right on the part of Mordecai, because Mordecai had foiled an assassination plot. So it's like the only record in all of the Persian archives that would have been brought to his attention and not put him to sleep. That's the one that comes out here. So that's one of the most striking, I think, examples of providence that we have here, of the thousands and thousands of records that could have been brought. That's the one that's brought. And it all just works out. Haman just happens to be out in the court, and right when the king's thinking about all this, the timing plays out perfectly. I mean, there's just no better way that you could illustrate God's providence in the Book of Esther. And the fact that the Book of Esther doesn't mention God by name, it doesn't even mention a lot of things that we would connect to God, even some of the um, sort of standard Jewish things like prayer, and there's a noticeable absence of those sorts of things in the text. Fasting is about as close as we've gotten so far to anything that would be sort of traditionally, customarily Jewish. So you're really avoiding a lot of that kind of theological language. But that's the point of the Book of Esther. The Book of Esther is all about providence, and it is just as applicable today as it was, so many years ago, that God is aware of what's going on in the world. He's aware of rulers, and he is capable of nudging and shoving and sometimes dragging rulers to where they need to be. And he maintains control over this world, despite how chaotic things may appear. You remember Mordecai earlier when the summons went out to announce this doomsday clock, that Mordecai and the whole city of Shushan was in chaos. But God is not in chaos. He's not worried about what's going to happen here. He works it all out. So there's a lot of that trust kind of inherent to the backbone of Esther there. And then we did make some connections to Joseph, and Joseph being paraded through the streets after being a slave, after being mistreated, falsely accused. He ends up being put in royal garb and paraded through the streets, and somebody announces his blessed status in front of him, rides in front of his chariot and announces his blessed status, Saphanath Paneah, the life giver, the one who saved us. And so this is very similar, and the providence of God is very clear in the life of Joseph. Is very clear in the life of Esther and Mordecai here as well. Andrew?
Well, talking about what you would like to have the thoughts of being able to read a person's mind, it just came to me while y'all were talking. I was also thinking, uh, initially, you almost get a picture of Haman being like the number two guy. It's perfect. I mean, a lot of number twos want to be the number ones, but the number one guy in this situation, Ahasuerus, Xerxes, he's had a lot of issues. And it's almost perfect for the number two guy. He can be sort of in the shadows, but really ruling everything and get his way. But this time it's backfired on him. And we're going to see that it's going to backfire him even further, because we left off in a cliffhanger of you just don't know if it's going to get better or it's going to get worse. Probably he's thinking, well, at least I'm going to go to another banquet to maybe so I can put myself at ease of just what happened. There's like no real time to process what really just happened. Everything was going perfect to plan, exactly the way I wanted to go. And here, which furthers the irony and furthers what we would have liked to have seen as far as facial expression from Mordecai. If you recall, we've already mentioned he was at the king's gate, not inside it, because he had been wailing, sackcloth and bitterly wailing about what was going to happen to the people. And that's kind of an allusion as well as to what happened to people who were sorrowful in this time period and past, especially among the Jews. And what was also ironic is Esther had attempted to send clothes to Mordecai. He refused. And here you have Haman was commanded to clothe Mordecai, and he does receive the clothes. and there's a reversal that takes place. Who's mourning now? Haman's mourning. So there's just that reversal of fortune, if you call it. Talking about irony. And Mordecai is now at the king's gate, and it just seems that you're starting to look at that there's light at the end of the tunnel for the people, and that there's darkness starting to really set in for Haman and for his wicked devices. Remember, he was called the enemy of the Jews. And it just goes to show what resentment can do to you. It just could destroy you. And we're going to see what happens in chapter 7. And so let's look at the first 6 verses. And Eric, I'm going to have you, if you would, read chapter 7, verses 1 through 6.
Esther 7, 1 through 6. Now the king and Haman came to drink wine with Esther the queen, and the king said to Esther on the second day also, as they drank their wine at the banquet, "What is your petition, Queen Esther? It shall be granted you. And what is your request? Even to half of the kingdom it shall be done." Then Queen Esther replied, "If I have found favor in your sight, O king, and if it pleases the king, let my life be given me as my petition, and my people as my request. For we have been sold, I and my people, to be destroyed, to be killed, to be annihilated. Now, if we had only been sold as slaves, men and women, I would have remained silent, for the trouble would not be commensurate with annoyance to the king." Then King Ahasuerus asked Queen Esther, "Who is he, and where is he, who would presume to do thus?" Esther said, "A foe and an enemy is this wicked Haman." Then Haman became terrified before the king and the queen. Yeah, this is like a telenovela is what this is. This is some serious drama that's going on here and some serious setup that's happening. The end of the last chapter, again, Haman's just kind of rushed out of like, what, his head's spinning. Like he's got these fair weather friends around him that in the previous chapter are like, yeah, you take them down, you build those gallows and you take down Mordecai the Jew. And then, they're like, after the tide shifts, they're like, "Did you say Mordecai was a Jew?" Oh, no. That's not going to work in your favor. And so his head's spinning because of this. He's dragged off to the feast and the banquet, which to this point has been a source of joy to him, but now he's like perturbed. And his head's spinning. Probably Mordecai too is like, what is going on? He's got some degree of confidence. Chapter 4, deliverance is going to arise for the Jews from some unknown, unspecified place. So he's got some degree of confidence that things are going to work out, but it's still kind of chaos for him. It's like gloom and doom, as Andrew brought out, like he's refusing garments change, and then all of a sudden he's paraded through the streets, and it's like, what's going on here, And of course, they got this big setup again, and Queen Esther really just sort of pacifies the king. She uses that term king and addresses him by his title. She's not like beloved husband, dearest husband. She doesn't like try to kind of schmooze him, but she looks to him as the authority, and she sort of appeals to that sense that he has, because to this point it seems like the king's kind of been just dragged around, and he doesn't even know what's going on. And Haman's just got him eating out of the palm of his hand. He's like, "You do this," and the king's like, "Okay, yeah." And so it's almost like Esther's sort of like helping the king regain his manhood and his dominance. She's like, "You're the king. What's going on here? Do you realize that this schmuck, is he's set us up to kill us all, to commit genocide in your kingdom? Do you even realize what's going on? You're the king. You better do something about this. And since you are the king, it would be good for you to do." Now, on the part of Esther too, she does sort of employ understatement too. She's like, "If we were going to be sold as slaves, then I wouldn't have bothered you with it. We would have been slaves, and no big deal. But I tell you what, this is a big annoyance on your part. It's like, well, that's not just an annoyance. I mean, genocide is more than an annoyance, but it's definitely an understatement that she's using here. And she's like, I really, I didn't even want to bother you with it, but I know this is not going to work out for your benefit. And that really has been kind of through the ages. God's people are good people to have around, especially for rulers and royalty. They're good people to have around because they're doing what's right. And they're, trying to make amends if they've done something wrong. These are the sort of people you want as citizens. Some of the early apologists of Christianity made that argument to the emperors of Rome, saying, why are you persecuting Christians? They're the number one people you want in your kingdom. And so it's kind of what Esther's looking to here. But she does a setup kind of like Nathan does with David in 2 Samuel 12. She's kind of like, she sort of gives the presentation unnamed of the person to stir up their wrath and their response. And then, right at that moment, she sort of like pulls the rug out and she says, it's Haman, which to me is got all the drama of like a Shakespearean tragedy, or like I said, like a telenovela, it's all this big setup, and then it's like, it's him, you could even see her pointing at him like, it's him, it's Haman, and she's very clear about who everybody is. I'm a Jew. My people are consigned to death. Haman is the enemy. You are the king. She's very clear about who everybody is. And how could you not respond as the king and have Haman killed in this scenario? There's perfect precision and wisdom here. I love it. Chris?
It's interesting, the tact, and we talked about that before with her presentation of everything. She doesn't go guns a-blazing into it. She even kind of lulls Haman to sleep. I don't think Haman had any idea that this banquet was going to take this turn, and then all of a sudden he's going to be put on the spot. It even talks about him being terrified. When we read in chapter 3 about him asking for the decree, verse 8, he says, there is a certain people scattered and dispersed among the people in all the provinces of your kingdom. Their laws are different from all other peoples. They do not keep the king's laws. Therefore, it is not fitting for the king to let them remain. So it's interesting the way he phrases that. There's no mention of Jew necessarily in that. And then when she mentions it, there's no mention necessarily at the beginning, I am of Jewish descent. It's just the decree that was issued is targeting a group of people, and that group of people is my group of people. And we've talked about Ahasuerus, and I like what you said, Eric, kind of giving him his manhood back. And it really is. So he tells her in verse 2, what's your petition? It shall be granted to you. What is your request? Up to half the kingdom, it shall be done. You have to wonder how many people he told that, because with Haman, there was no like, oh, you're wanting to commit genocide. Oh, let me stop you. It was like, okay, that's fine. You want to do that? That's okay. Like, that's just kind of how he is. It seems like very easy to manipulate. But Esther, it's I don't know if cool's the word. It's so interesting watching how smoothly she handles this. And I know that it couldn't have been like, oh, I know I'm going to get this done. I'm going to take care of this, because there was hesitancy before with the conversation with her and Mordecai. But I like what you said, Eric, and I was going to say it if you didn't. It's really similar to the language with Nathan and David, where he tells David the story, and David is just so upset. Who is this? You're the man. And then David, you can just imagine David just sinks. Ahasuerus isn't the man necessarily, but it's like a movie. He did it. I could just see it pointing at Haman. He's the one that did this.
He's
And
the
then
man.
Haman, yeah, he's the man. And all of a sudden, like I don't know if you've ever seen anybody, maybe they get embarrassed or they just a sense of fright. You can almost imagine Haman in a chair just beginning to slip down in the chair, like, oh no, what is about to happen? And once again, it's one of those things with the body language. You wonder what his body language was during this. You wonder mentally what's going through Haman's head. Because really, from what we can tell, inferring here, going into chapter 6, Haman thinks this plan's going to work. It's going to be smoothed over. You know, they're going to take care of Mordecai, his family, and his friends. Like, he's good with Ahasuerus. He's probably going to go and ask for Mordecai's head, and Ahasuerus is going to say, that's fine. And then all of a sudden in chapter 6, everything, like Andrew had said, it begins to kind of just flip. Now Ahasuerus is beginning to kind of be enlightened by Esther of what's going on, and everything flips with Haman and Mordecai. Mordecai's now the favored one. Mordecai's now the one that's being paraded around by the king. Mordecai is now the one whose life is going to be spared. And Haman now is in a bad predicament where he's been identified finally for what he is. I mean, really, you think in that instance, you always have time to make a wrong right as long as God allows you opportunity and time. But in that instance, when she says it's him, he probably is like, it's over. Like, you're in this banquet. If Ahasuerus wants you there as the king, he's not going to let you leave. And really, you know, it's his own fault he's in this predicament. And it's just like you'd said, Eric, humor, irony. It's like, you know, you wanted to do this to Mordecai. You wanted to embarrass Mordecai. And now Esther has called you out to your face in the presence of the king. And now you're going to have to answer and suffer the consequences for your actions. And, you know, once again, he wasn't fighting with Mordecai and he wasn't fighting with Esther. Now, I don't think he understood this, but ultimately, God put him in that room and God put Esther in that room. And God is able to protect his people the way that he does. And Haman teaches us a valuable lesson that I said at the beginning. Good luck fighting with God. You're not going to win. You might as well submit. You might as well follow God's will because you're not going to win that argument or that fight with God. He's a lot stronger than us. And in this instance, Haman thought he had his I's crossed, his T's crossed, or his I's dotted, his T's crossed. Didn't work out. Didn't work out for him. And everything has flipped and changed really at this banquet. What do you got, Andrew?
Y'all probably, because I'm ancient, and you all remind me that years ago, probably in the 80s, maybe the early 90s, there was a series of commercials of, I think, Chaser's Choice coffee, and they would sort of leave off on a cliffhanger. And that's what we had on, chapter 6, like what's going to happen. And we've seen a number of cliffhangers. And again, there's where we stop is another cliffhanger, like what's going to happen next. And it's keep on building and building. And there's all this excitement. You see why like people like Shakespeare and why soap operas today, if they don't realize what they're putting out there, a lot of that, can be illustrated from certain things that happen in scripture or scenarios. And I just see this as like a very dramatic soap opera, like unfolding in a sense. All these things are building, and you think that with everything that Haman has done, he's been very methodical and he's been very conniving. And all of a sudden, right at the right moment, he's pulled away and he's brought into this other banquet, or this second day of this banquet. And then it's brought to light what he's all along been doing. Is his character is finally really revealed, and like the king's eyes are really found, like brought to light, like who really this man is. It just makes me think if he had more time, potentially Haman might be able to smooth talk his way out of this scenario, or say something to the effect, who do you say that I'm doing such a thing? Because the king has proven himself time and again. He's been very weak, been very easy to manipulate, and won over by essentially anyone. But over and over, you're presented with another scenario where, again, God's not mentioned, but in the background, you can clearly see that, God's making things work. And this is certainly a time where his providence is coming together. And I love how we've already talked about some aspects of the way that Esther responds. She says that, look, in verse 3, if we recall before, when she was talking to Mordecai back in chapter 4, saying like, I can't go to the king without risking my life unless he calls me. And if he don't extend that scepter, I'm going to die. And here she, in verse 3, again is very humble by first saying, my life is put at stake. I'm asking for my life. So this is serious. And just a few words before, the king is saying like, look, I'm willing to give you everything that your heart's desire. I want you to be happy. And then all of a sudden, like, whoa, can imagine what the king is saying. Like, when he's saying like, king, I'm asking for my life and the life of my people. It's like, wow, can imagine his eyes getting very big. And this is no longer just a party of just pleasure and joyful. This is something that, okay, let's get serious now. And uh, and you almost wonder if, because I get the sense that the king really respects Esther now, even more so. It's like, she's not trying to win him over about like kissing his feet, as far as trying to pat him on the back or whatever, trying to get favors. She's essentially throwing herself at his mercy and asking, look, here's my favor, here's my request. We just want to live. I don't even have to be queen anymore. Because if she's a slave, she wouldn't be queen. If that was going to be what took place. But much respect to Queen Esther and how she responds. And when she boldly, and there's a tremendous shift in how Esther is, in my eyes, portrayed now. I mean, she was once very fearful, not willing, or very hesitant. Well, first of all, if you remember, she had isolated herself in a sense because she was in the palace and she had not heard of this edict, and she had to be made aware for Mordecai to send somebody to tell her about the edict. And then she was at first hesitant about going to the king, asked the people to fast for 3 days, and then finally, I mean, there's steps in the process of her getting that courage and going forward to the king. And now you could sense, okay, I've got the boldness given to me. The king has showed up again. I'm not dead. I had this opportunity to ask, okay, this is the perfect setting. This is the time to do it. And you almost think that it is perfect because, as it's already been said, Haman's mind is in no way, shape, or form able to refute, able to come up with some kind of deception to get him outside of this. His head's already spinning from what happened, and there's no way to recover. And you can imagine it's all the color of his face, just completely like I could picture him white as a ghost in this instance. And you were just saying, like, he knows he's guilty. He knows that there's nothing he could do. And let's see what further happens. And Chris, I'm going to ask you if you'd be willing to read from verse 7. And why don't we actually go through verse 2 of chapter 8? I know that goes into chapter 8 a little bit, but let's just at least read those first two verses.
Okay. Then the king arose in his wrath from the banquet of wine and went into the palace garden. But Haman stood before Queen Esther, pleading for his life, for he saw that evil was determined against him by the king. When the king returned from the palace garden to the place of the banquet of wine, Haman had fallen across the couch where Esther was. And then the king said, will he also assault the queen while I am in the house? As the word left the king's mouth, they covered Haman's face. Now Harbatheon, one of the eunuchs, said to the king, look, the gallows 50 cubits high, which Haman made for Mordecai, who spoke good on the king's behalf, is standing at the house of Haman. Then the king said, hang him on it. So they hanged Haman on the gallows that he had prepared for Mordecai. Then the king's wrath subsided. On that day, King Ahasuerus gave Queen Esther the house of Haman, the enemy of the Jews, and Mordecai came before the king, for Esther had told how he was related to her. So the king took off his signet ring, which he had taken from Haman, and gave it to Mordecai, and Esther appointed Mordecai over the house of Haman. Ironic is the word that I kind of think of. And it's funny, like you think, I'm one of those people, I pace a lot. I don't even have to be upset. I'm just one of those people that pace. Like if you ever talk to me on the phone, I'm probably walking around. That's just how I am. And I think the king is so enraged. He kind of removes himself from the situation, maybe to gather some clarity in the garden. And you can just imagine him pacing back and forth while he leaves. Which one thing, if Haman's trying to kill Esther's people, I don't know if I would leave him alone with Esther. Would kind of be my thought if I was the king, but he does leave. And Haman, like Andrew had said, he's talked Ahasuerus into stuff before. Maybe he can kind of try to talk his way out of this too. Esther, I didn't mean that. Oh, I'm so sorry that I did this. Please have mercy on me. And you think providentially again, when Ahasuerus walks in, it says that Haman had fallen across the couch where Esther was, and then Ahasuerus, will he also assault the queen while I'm in the house? So it's like you think before this banquet, there's no indication that Ahasuerus thought anything negative of Haman. But once this revelation is made, now it's Haman is this awful, terrible person that really, you think Ahasuerus has some fault in this too for empowering Haman to do this. But he's gone from Haman, let's eat at this banquet together, let's spend time together, to come in and say, now you're going to hurt the queen after this revelation's been made. And you think at this point with Ahasuerus, there's nothing Haman can do. He's not going to change their minds. And he, as I said before, there is opportunity for him to change. There's opportunities throughout this text that he could have made right what he did, and he didn't do it. And now he's trying to beg, which in my opinion probably is coming from a place that wasn't really genuine. He probably just doesn't want to be punished for how he felt. And then once again, the irony. The eunuch's like, hey, Ahasuerus, there's this gallows that's 50 cubits high that's at Haman's house that Haman was going to use on Mordecai, the guy that you just paraded around the city, that you had Haman take. And the king says, hang him on it. Which really, if you think through this text, this is one of the first times we see Ahasuerus kind of make his own decision. He's not really made to make it by anybody or influenced or manipulated. He's making a sound decision. Hang him there. Um, and you see throughout it's mentioned multiple times his wrath, his anger. Verse 10 says that after Haman was hung, uh, the king's wrath subsided. So, this is what he wanted. And after this was done, I guess he ultimately felt a little bit better. And then once again, with the irony, when we get into the first two verses of chapter 8, uh, then Esther kind of reveals her relation to Mordecai. And then Mordecai takes off the signet ring from Haman that he had given to him. And now he gives it to Mordecai, which is so ironic considering that the two main parties that have had issues with each other is Mordecai and Haman. They've had problems the whole time. Now Haman's out of the picture, and Ahasuerus is like, all right, Mordecai, here's this signet ring, and I'm also going to appoint you over Haman's house. So it's like rubbing salt in the wound. Haman's already out of the picture, but God continues to lift up Mordecai. And I like what you said, Eric, with Joseph. Specifically, you can see that narrative play out in Genesis 2, as well as you're going to build up Joseph. All these bad things happen. It seems doom and gloom, and God uses Joseph providentially time and time again. Same thing happens with Mordecai. So you think if Esther's not in this position when she is, if she doesn't have the courage to do what she does, if God doesn't put her there, Mordecai's in trouble and the Jewish people are in trouble as a whole. But once again, Haman learned the hard way. You cannot beat God. Good luck. It's not going to work. And before I pass it on to you, Eric, it's one of those things you think of like character development. It kind of makes you want to say, good job, Ahasuerus. Way to make a rational decision on your own. Maybe this is a stepping stone for him to grow and maybe change his life too along the way. So I think that's interesting that that's in there, that he makes the decision here. And it's actually the right decision. And he comes to really that conclusion after Esther reveals how Haman really was. We got Eric.
Yeah, for Ahasuerus, his head had to be spinning too. He's like, I thought we were just here to party. Like, what? Why are you bringing all this hard, heavy stuff? Like, we were just here to party. Like he just has this kind of spirit of levity, and sort of like a lackadaisical sort of a view. And then, this is put right on his plate, and on the one hand, he wants to act immediately because of his zeal for Esther, who's found favor in his eyes. Again, he doesn't even know that it's the Jews. He knows that it's Esther's people, but it's really kind of the Esther connection that's provoked him, and sort of incensed him and awakened him from his drunken stupor that he's been sitting in for months, apparently. And so, you finally have this moment of clarity, and it's like, oh, is that what's going on? And he has to sort of find his bearings. So I could understand him wanting to kind of like walk out of the room and be like, what is going on here? What did I just hear? Find his bearings. And then on top of that, Haman is a high official. So like, if you're gonna take somebody out of a high ranking office, how are you going to compensate for their immediate loss? I don't know if he's putting a whole lot of thought into that, but that certainly would be a consequence of the action if you're taking Haman out. He's been elevated to a really supreme place. Who knows what all sorts of things he was in charge of. Let's think for a moment that maybe he was in charge of sanitation or something. You take him out, what's going to happen? Who's going to take care of sanitation? You take him out. Let's say he's the Secretary of War and you got wars going on 3 of your fronts. You take him out, what are you supposed to do in his absence? And so, maybe all these questions are kind of like coming to his mind, and he's like, all right, I need to take care of him, but what am I supposed to do about this, this, and this? And if I sort of knock him out, it's like taking a section of 10 dominoes out of a whole string of dominoes. You got a big gap. Like, what are you going to do? Obviously you want to take care of him because he's wants to commit genocide against the queen and her people. But then, what all is this going on? And then of course he comes back in and he sees Haman on top of Esther. He's like, forget that. We're not even gonna worry about them questions. We're gonna take care of it. He needs to die now. He needs to die now. And it sort of all begs the question about what all's going through his head and who all is at the feast. It just says they covered his face. Who? Who covered his face? Why didn't they stop Haman from falling on the couch with Esther? So I got all these questions too. I'm like, what all is going on here? And the king's probably thinking to himself the same thing. How I got all these guys standing around and this guy's on top of my wife. Like, is everybody against me? And then finally, yeah, I do love Harbona. Harbona's like, oh yeah, by the way, Haman just so happened to build like a 75-foot place to torment and torture and kill people. And that would be a good thing to have right now, wouldn't it? So we talked about that in the scriptures, like the fowler, he sets the trap and it springs back on him. The evil person, digs a pit and he's gonna be the one that falls into it. This is exactly what happens here. This is biblical wisdom 101. That this all happens, and of course he gets hanged for his crimes against the Jews. Jesus gets hanged for his alleged crimes against the Jews. But in reality, he was bringing deliverance. So it's kind of an interesting typology, almost like an unexpected opposing typology here, where Haman's very different than Jesus. Of course, he would fit into the same sort of stream as like Absalom, a son of David who doesn't want to bring about David's affairs and David's goals and David's ambitions, and he doesn't have David's faith. So you have that, of course, with Absalom in the Jewish faith. Then you have that with, of course, this man, Haman, an Agagite, son of Hamadatha, outside of the Jewish faith. He's got that same sort of persona. And then, yeah, you have the reversal of it. The signet ring I find to be really interesting. Probably the very same one or a similar one that would have been used for that decree that had been sent out. Now on Mordecai's finger, really it's the ball is definitely in his court now to make things right. So this you can just imagine like a storm brewing, and this tornado barreling down on Haman. And then finally he just gets swooped right up into it, and you could just watch it and all the chaos that happens and ensues. But really that sort of momentary chaos shows that almost like catharsis that happens there. Like Chris brought out in verse 10, the king's anger subsided. It's almost like, okay, the problems are done. But as the reader, and if you were a Jew at this time, the problems are not done because the threat is still in place. And that's really what the rest of the book's going to deal with and respond to and clean up. Andrew?
Well, there's a lot here, as you all have already unpacked it. It just makes me wonder, and it almost seems as the providence continues to occur, given the king an opportunity to chill and wisely, because we could be when somebody steps on our toes, we want to immediately lash out. Not even take a second to let me breathe for a moment and think about what best thing to do in this moment. So he takes a breather. Maybe not the wisest decision, leave his queen vulnerable to a potential attack. And we do kind of wonder what type of assault it's in question about. What does he mean? Because is it sexual in nature, and or is it just sort of pleading at her feet, so to speak? But it's definitely drawing his concern, and part of me is like wondering, well, uh, the king has the power, not the queen, to ultimately make the sentence. But again, Haman's not in his right mind with everything that has transpired. And who knows? Uh, can imagine, like, I don't know what to do. I don't know how to fix this. Um, and it, when you're talking about the gallows and mentioning Jesus, it also made me think that he would be perfect illustration as being one that was one of the robbers on the cross next to Jesus. Very much um, deserving of being up there for his crimes, but not truly repenting. He could have been like the actual thief who repented, yet still deserving of having his life forfeited, which happened to the thief. And this is an example. Yeah, his life, rightly so, deserved to be forfeited of what he did. But it's also a lesson that he could have saved himself spiritually if he truly repented and said something to the effect of, yes, what I did was wrong. I will accept my punishment. Now, that's easier said than done, of course. But having that last moment of willing to confess, repent, not necessarily saying that he would be saved on this side of eternity, that his life might have very well been forfeited, but saying, you know what, I recognize that's what one would hope for, but he, in his situation, sadly, he chose sin to completely dominate his life. He allowed that to take control, and and we continue to see just the complete change where he is brought down and Mordecai is now elevated. It makes me wonder, okay, what's going to happen to the people that were in the house of Haman? Are their lives forfeited? Or what's going to happen to them? Don't necessarily know there, but anyway, it's just remarkable, and that we never know what's going to happen in a given situation. When we think that the worst possible outcome is going to occur, we may see a completely different outcome. It's a great illustration of, if we trust in God, put it our faith in Him, He can work things out for our good. He's definitely going to work things out for His good. And I think this is a perfect illustration of how He furthered, brought His glory. And He didn't have to put His name out there. And we can, I think, very well infer correctly that God's in control of this situation. It's just, with all the things that we've talked about and read, it's undeniable that God's handiwork is completely involved in this account. And it's been a great story so far, a factual story, and look forward to what the last couple chapters entails. And Lord willing, we'll continue our discussion next week. But hopefully what we've talked about has got you to think, and we hope that it's got you to wonder more about who God is and what it means to have a relationship with God, or what we need to do in order to be pleasing to God, and just how destructive sin is, where it can lead somebody, and we just can't have that be a part of our lives. And it just leads to people's downfall, and we need to make sure that we are not headed in the wrong direction. Haman uh, led in or headed in the wrong direction, and led it to his demise. And we certainly don't want to live in such a way that we are going to cause our own suffering or the suffering of other people. And so we need to make sure that we're doing what we need to do in this life in order to be welcome into the next. So please don't hesitate to reach out to us if it's something, whether it be what we talked about today, or the Book of Esther, or wherever else in the book of or in the scriptures. And we just want to make sure that we are doing that which pleases God, and is going to be what welcomes us into heaven. So reach out to us at the Tazewell Road Church of Christ Facebook page, or at TazewellRDChurchofChrist.com. You can find us there. Love to talk to you further. And Lord willing, we will be back next week for another episode of Three Guys and the Word. But until then, may God bless you, and take care.